The cool autumn breeze swept through the sprawling expanse of Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, rustling the golden leaves that had begun to fall. The sky was a dull gray, mirroring the heavy weight in David Reynolds' chest as he walked along the cobblestone path. He carried a bouquet of white lilies, his late wife's favorite flowers, but there was no warmth in his grip, no real connection to the gesture. It was something he did out of habit now, a routine that had lost its meaning. It had been exactly 1 year since Emily had passed away, and though time had dulled the initial sting of grief, an emptiness still clung to him like a shadow. David had never been a man of emotions. He was a businessman first, a husband second. Success had always been his priority and emotions were distractions. At least that's what he used to believe. He had spent years building his real estate empire, investing in high-end properties in New York City and beyond, accumulating wealth that most people could only dream of. Money, power, influence, he had it all. But the one thing he had taken for granted, the one person who had ever truly mattered, was gone. As he reached Emily's grave, he hesitated. The polished marble headstone gleamed despite the overcast sky, her name engraved in delicate cursive. Emily Reynolds, beloved wife and friend, 1982 to 2023. It was simple, elegant, just like she had been. He crouched down, placing the flowers at the base of the stone, but he felt no closer to her. The silence was deafening. Then a sound broke through. A soft sniffle, barely audible, carried by the wind. At first, David thought he was imagining it, but as he turned his head slightly, his gaze landed on a small figure just a few feet away. A little girl no older than 6 or 7, sat curled up on the damp ground, her tiny arms wrapped around her knees. Her hair was dark, tangled, and unkempt, and her oversized jacket looked worn, as if it had been passed down too many times. She wasn't just sitting near Emily's grave, she was leaning against it, her face buried in her arms. David's brow furrowed. He wasn't used to seeing children here. Cemeteries weren't places for kids. He stood up, brushing the dirt from his tailored coat, and approached her cautiously. "Hey," he said, his voice unintentionally gruff. The girl didn't react. He hesitated before trying again. "Are you lost?" She lifted her head slightly, and he caught a glimpse of her tear-streaked face. Her eyes were wide, dark, and filled with something he couldn't quite place. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in days. "No," she whispered. David glanced around. There were a few other visitors scattered in the distance, but no one seemed to be looking for a lost child. He turned back to her. "Where are your parents?" The girl shook her head, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her oversized jacket. "I don't have any." Something about the way she said it made his stomach twist. He had met plenty of people who played the sympathy card, who had used sob stories to manipulate emotions. But this wasn't that. This wasn't an act. There was too much rawness in her voice, too much pain for someone so small. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she murmured. He nodded, trying to make sense of this. "Lily, do you know?" He hesitated, not wanting to scare her. "Do you know Emily?" At this, her lips trembled. She turned her gaze back to the headstone, her little fingers tracing the engraved letters as if she had done it 100 times before. "She was my friend," she whispered. David felt something tighten in his chest. His wife had been many things: kind, patient, selfless. She had always believed in helping people, even when he had told her it was a waste of time. But he had never heard of this girl before. Why would Emily have known her? Lily sniffled again, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said she'd come back." David's breath caught. For a long moment he didn't know what to say. He had spent his entire life navigating high-stakes deals, negotiating with ruthless businessmen, making cutthroat decisions without hesitation. But this was different. This was something he couldn't analyze, couldn't control. He cleared his throat. "Lily, where do you live?" She shrugged, hugging her knees tighter. A cold realization settled over him. If she had no parents, no home, had she been living here? The idea seemed absurd, but as he studied her again, he noticed the signs he had missed before. The dirt on her hands, the way her clothes hung loosely on her frame, the exhaustion in her eyes. Emily had always been drawn to people in need. She had spent hours volunteering at shelters, donating money, and fighting for causes he had dismissed as unimportant. Had she been helping this girl? "Who took care of you before?" he asked carefully. Lily hesitated, as if debating whether to trust him. "My mom," she said finally. "But she got sick. She said Miss Emily would help us." Her voice cracked at the last words and she quickly wiped at her eyes, embarrassed. "But she didn't come back." David swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her the truth, that Emily hadn't left her on purpose. that she would have come back if she could. But what good would that do? Instead, he crouched down so he was at her level. When was the last time you ate? She shrugged again. His stomach clenched. Without thinking, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet. He always carried cash, old habits from his early business days. He pulled out $100 bill and held it out to her. Here, he said. Get yourself something to eat. Lily looked at the money, then at him. Her brows furrowed, and for a moment he thought she might take it. But then, to his surprise, she shook her head. Miss Emily never gave me money, she said quietly. She gave me food. David's hand froze in midair. Something about the way she said it made him feel ashamed. He had spent his life believing money could fix anything, that throwing cash at a problem made it disappear. But this girl didn't want his money. She wanted something else. She wanted someone to care. A cold gust of wind blew through the cemetery, and David suddenly felt an unfamiliar weight settle over him. He had come here expecting nothing more than a routine visit, a way to ease his guilt for a few minutes before returning to his empty penthouse. But now, standing here with this fragile child in front of him, he realized he couldn't just walk away. He had no idea what he was supposed to do, but one thing was clear: Emily wouldn't have left her here. And neither could he. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. David stood there, the crisp autumn wind brushing against his face as he looked down at Lily. She wasn't crying anymore, but her small frame still trembled slightly in the chilly air. He had spent his entire life negotiating high-stakes deals, making multi-million-dollar decisions without a second thought, yet here he was, frozen, because of a little girl sitting by his wife's grave. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Emily had never mentioned this child, never once spoken about taking care of someone outside their marriage. But as David stared at Lily, he couldn't ignore the overwhelming feeling that his wife had left something behind, something he was now meant to figure out. He sighed, slipping the $100 bill back into his wallet. He had never considered himself a particularly kind man, but he wasn't heartless either. He crouched down again, ignoring the dampness of the grass beneath his knee. Lily, do you have anywhere to go? He asked, his voice softer this time. She hesitated, her little fingers gripping the hem of her oversized jacket. I don't know, she mumbled. I used to stay with my mom, then at the shelter. But the shelter got full, and Miss Emily always told me to come here if I felt lost. She lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. So I came. David exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. The pieces were starting to fit together now. Emily had always been involved in charity work, constantly pushing him to donate, to visit shelters, to help those who couldn't help themselves. He had always dismissed it as her personal passion, something separate from their lives together. But clearly it hadn't been separate at all. It had been a part of who she was. And now, because of that, this little girl was sitting in front of him with nowhere to go. A part of him wanted to turn around, to convince himself that this wasn't his problem. He had done his duty, he had asked if she needed help. He had offered money. But another part of him, the part that still felt the dull ache of losing Emily, knew that walking away would mean betraying everything his wife had stood for. He took a deep breath, adjusting his coat against the wind. Come on, he said finally, standing up and offering her his hand. Let's get you something to eat. Lily blinked up at him, wary at first. But after a moment she hesitantly reached out, her small fingers slipping into his. The touch startled him, how tiny and fragile her hand felt in his. He wasn't used to this, wasn't used to the responsibility of another person's life outside of business transactions. But as he led her toward the entrance of the cemetery, he felt something shift inside him. The streets of Brooklyn were busy despite the overcast sky, people rushing past them, lost in their own worlds. David wasn't sure where to take her at first, but then he spotted a familiar diner on Fifth Avenue, one that Emily used to love. It was a small place, nothing fancy, but the food was good and the owner, Maggie, had always been kind. As they stepped inside, the warmth from the heaters immediately embraced them, a welcome contrast to the cold outside. Maggie, a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair, glanced up from the counter and did a double take when she saw David. Well, if it isn't Mr. Reynolds, she said, a smile creeping onto her face. Haven't seen you in here since. Her smile faltered slightly, and David knew she was thinking about Emily. He cleared his throat. Yeah, it's been a while. He gestured toward Lily. She could use something warm to eat. Maggie's eyes softened as she looked at Lily. Of course, honey. Take a seat. I'll bring you both something. They slid into a booth near the window, the soft hum of conversation and clinking dishes filling the air. Lily sat quietly, her small hands resting in her lap. She still looked wary, as if she expected him to change his mind and leave her at any moment. David wasn't sure what to say to make her feel at ease, so he simply asked, "What do you like to eat?" She hesitated. "Miss Emily used to get me pancakes," she said finally. David felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't known that. He hadn't known his wife had been bringing this girl here, sitting at these very booths, ordering her pancakes. How much of Emily's life had he missed while he had been too busy chasing wealth and success? Maggie returned a few minutes later with a steaming plate of pancakes for Lily and a coffee for David. As the little girl took her first bite, her eyes lit up with a flicker of happiness. It was the first time he had seen her smile, and for some reason, that small moment made something inside him ache. They ate in silence for a while, the sound of Lily's fork scraping against the plate the only noise between them. When she was halfway through, she looked up at him suddenly. "Are you Miss Emily's husband?" she asked. David nodded slowly. "Yeah, I was." Lily swallowed, her expression unreadable. "She told me you were always busy," she said simply. There was no malice in her tone, just an innocent observation. But it hit David like a punch to the gut. He set his coffee down, staring at the table. "Yeah," he admitted. "I was." She poked at the remaining pancake on her plate, her brows furrowing. "She said you were nice. Just not good at showing it." David let out a breathy chuckle, though there was no humor in it. Sounds like something she'd say. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling more exhausted than he had in years. Lily finished her pancakes, pushing the plate away. "I miss her," she said softly. David looked at her, really looked at her this time. This wasn't just some lost kid. She had been a part of Emily's life, a part he had never taken the time to see. He had spent the last year grieving in silence, drowning himself in work, pretending that moving forward meant forgetting. But now, sitting across from this little girl who had known his wife in ways he hadn't, he realized how wrong he had been. He reached for his wallet again, pulling out more cash, but then stopped himself. Emily hadn't just thrown money at problems. She had given people her time, her heart. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Lily needed now. David exhaled, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "Come on, kid," he said, standing up and offering her his hand once more. "Let's figure this out. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends." David wasn't sure what he was doing. He had never been the kind of man to make impulsive decisions, yet here he was, stepping out of the diner with a little girl who had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The cold air hit them as they walked onto Fifth Avenue, but he barely felt it. His mind was too busy racing through the endless questions that had no easy answers. Where was Lily's mother? Had Emily been helping her in secret all this time? And most importantly, what was he supposed to do now? He glanced down at Lily, who clutched the sleeves of her oversized jacket as they walked. She wasn't saying much, but there was something about the way she stuck close to him that made him realize she wasn't just following, she was trusting him. That was something David wasn't sure he deserved. As they reached the curb, a yellow cab slowed down in front of them. David hesitated for a second before opening the door. "Come on," he said, motioning for Lily to get in. She hesitated just a fraction of a second before climbing inside. He slid in after her and gave the driver his address in Brooklyn Heights. It wasn't until they were moving through the crowded streets of New York that David realized how strange this must have looked. Him, a well-dressed businessman, riding in the back of a cab with a child who looked like she hadn't had a warm bed in weeks. But at this point he didn't care. He had to figure out what Emily had been doing and why she had never told him about it. Lily sat quietly beside him, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. After a few minutes she finally spoke. "Miss Emily never told you about me, did she?" Her voice was small, but there was something in her tone, something that made David's throat tighten. He shook his head. "No," he admitted. "She didn't." Lily nodded, as if she had already known the answer. "She said you were busy," she murmured. "Too busy for a lot of things." David exhaled, rubbing his temple. He had spent his whole life chasing success, building an empire, making sure he and Emily had everything they could ever need. And yet, in the process, he had missed the one thing that had mattered most, her heart. He had known Emily was kind, had known she cared about people, but he had never realized just how deeply involved she had been in the lives of others. He had assumed her charity work was just that, work. He had never imagined it meant something much bigger than donations and fundraisers. As the cab pulled up in front of his brownstone, David paid the driver and stepped out, holding the door open for Lily. She hesitated, staring up at the grand house as if she didn't quite believe she belonged there. He understood the feeling. A few minutes ago he wouldn't have believed she belonged here either. But things were different now. "Come on," he said softly, leading her up the steps. Inside the house was quiet, too quiet. Ever since Emily had passed, the place had felt empty, like a museum of memories he didn't want to touch. He watched as Lily stepped inside cautiously, her small feet barely making a sound against the polished hardwood floor. She looked around, taking in the high ceilings, the pristine furniture, the framed photographs on the walls. Her eyes lingered on a picture of Emily near the fireplace. "She was always smiling," Lily whispered. David swallowed the lump in his throat. "Yeah," he said. "She was." He walked toward the kitchen, opening the fridge more out of habit than anything else. It was mostly empty, save for a few leftover takeout containers and a bottle of water. His housekeeper had stopped coming as frequently since Emily passed, and he hadn't bothered to keep the place stocked. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Lily shook her head, but he wasn't convinced. He grabbed a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter from the pantry. "This isn't exactly five-star dining," he said, "but it's something." He made a quick peanut butter sandwich and handed it to her. She took it carefully, as if she wasn't used to being given food without having to ask. As she ate, David leaned against the counter watching her. "Lily," he said finally, "where's your mom?" The question hung in the air for a moment before she swallowed and looked down at the table. She left," she murmured. "A while ago. I don't know where she went." David felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name, anger, sadness, guilt. He had no idea what it was like to grow up without stability, without a home. He had worked hard for everything he had, but he had always had a foundation to build on. Lily had nothing. "And your dad?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Never met him," she said simply. David exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Emily had known all of this. She had taken care of Lily when no one else would. And now, somehow, that responsibility had fallen onto him. He had spent the last year trying to forget, trying to move on from his grief by burying himself in work. But now, with this little girl sitting at his kitchen table, eating a peanut butter sandwich with the same quiet resilience that Emily had always admired in people, he realized that forgetting wasn't the answer. After a moment he straightened. "All right," he said. "You can stay here tonight. We'll figure out what to do tomorrow." Lily looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with something that almost looked like hope. "Really?" she asked. David nodded. "Yeah. But we'll need to talk to someone, find out if there's family, someone who can take care of you." The hope flickered in her eyes, but she nodded. "Okay." David didn't know what the future held, but as he watched Lily finish her sandwich, he knew one thing for certain. Emily had left him something far more valuable than money or success. She had left him a chance to be the man she had always believed he could be. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. David barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind tangled with thoughts he couldn't seem to escape. The past year had been a blur of grief, work, and empty nights spent in his silent house. But now everything had shifted in a single day. Lily was asleep in the guest room down the hall, and the weight of responsibility pressed against his chest in a way he wasn't used to. He had spent his life solving problems with money, with negotiations, with deals. But this wasn't something he could fix with a signed check or a business strategy. This was a little girl, abandoned and alone, who had somehow ended up in his life because of Emily. And now, for the first time since his wife's death, he felt like he had a reason to do more than just exist. The next morning he woke up earlier than usual, making his way to the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. He wasn't used to having someone else in the house, and as he glanced toward the hallway, he half expected Lily to still be asleep. But when he walked toward the guest room, he found the bed neatly made, the pillow fluffed as if no one had even slept there. Panic flared in his chest. Had she run away? He turned quickly and walked toward the front door, but then he heard the faint sound of movement from the living room. He found her sitting on the couch, staring at the photo of Emily that sat on the mantel above the fireplace. She didn't notice him at first, but when he cleared his throat, she turned to look at him. "Morning," he said, trying to keep his voice light. She gave a small nod. "Morning." He hesitated before stepping closer. "You sleep okay?" She shrugged. "Yeah." David exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He wasn't sure how to do this, how to talk to a child who had been through more than most adults. But he knew one thing. Emily had helped her, had taken care of her, and now it was his turn. "You hungry?" he asked. Lily hesitated for a second before nodding. David wasn't much of a cook, but he managed to scramble some eggs and toast a couple of slices of bread. As they sat at the kitchen table, he watched as Lily ate quietly, her small hands gripping the fork with a kind of careful precision, as if she wasn't used to having a proper meal in front of her. He didn't push her to talk. Instead, he let the silence sit between them, giving her space. After breakfast, David knew they needed to figure out what came next. He had no legal right to keep her, and he wasn't sure if she had any relatives who could take care of her. He pulled out his phone and searched for Child Protective Services in New York City. But before he could make the call, he glanced at Lily. She was sitting on the couch again, her hands folded in her lap, her small body curled into itself as if she were trying to make herself as small as possible. His chest tightened. She was terrified. He could see it in the way she held herself, in the way she refused to meet his eyes. He set the phone down. "Lily," he said carefully, sitting on the couch across from her. "I need to ask you something." She looked up warily. "Do you have any family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles? Someone who can take care of you?" She shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It was just me and my mom." And she left. David exhaled slowly. He had expected that answer, but hearing it still felt like a weight pressing against his ribs. He knew what the next step was. He needed to call child services, let them take over, find her a foster home. That was the right thing to do. The responsible thing. But as he looked at Lily, at the way she gripped the hem of her sweater like it was the only thing keeping her together, he realized something. Emily hadn't just helped this little girl, she had loved her. And David couldn't bring himself to let her go. "Okay," he said finally. "You can stay here. For now." Lily's eyes widened. "Really?" He nodded. "Yeah. But we're going to have to figure things out. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm not going to let you end up in some place you don't belong." For the first time since he had met her, Lily's expression softened. And in that moment, David knew this wasn't just about honoring Emily's memory. This was about something bigger. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. David had never imagined himself taking care of a child. His life had been built around business meetings, luxury events, and an empty house that he had convinced himself was enough. But now, as he adjusted to having Lily in his home, he realized just how much of a routine he had lost after Emily's passing. Waking up to the sound of another person moving around, making breakfast for someone other than himself, and coming home to see the lights on instead of complete darkness. It was all new, yet strangely familiar. Emily had always wanted children, but David had been too focused on his work to seriously consider it. Now, as he watched Lily sit at the kitchen table with a small notebook, doodling in the corners of the pages, he wondered if this was what Emily had envisioned. He had taken a leave from work for the first time in years. His assistant had been shocked when he announced it, but he knew he couldn't balance his corporate responsibilities and take care of Lily at the same time. The first few days had been filled with silence, both of them unsure of how to navigate this new arrangement. But slowly things began to change. Lily started leaving her room more often, watching television with him in the evenings, even asking questions about the books on the shelf. It was small progress, but it meant something. One morning, David decided it was time to take her out. She had been cooped up in the house since the day she arrived, and he figured a change of scenery might help. He had read somewhere that children needed structure, needed a sense of normalcy, so he decided to take her to Central Park. As they walked along the pathways, he noticed how she clung to the sleeves of her sweater, eyes darting around as if she expected something to go wrong at any moment. He hated that she had learned to live like this, with uncertainty, with fear. They sat on a bench near the playground, and for a while neither of them spoke. Then Lily turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did Emily ever talk about me?" David inhaled sharply. He had been expecting the question, but that didn't make it any easier to answer. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "She did." Lily looked down at her hands. "What did she say?" "She said you were special," David told her honestly. "She said you were brave. That you had a good heart." Lily bit her lip, nodding slowly. "She was nice to me," she said. "I don't think anyone's ever been that nice before." David felt something tighten in his chest. He had always known that Emily had a way of making people feel seen, but hearing it from Lily made it even more real. She had left an impact on this little girl's life, and now, it was up to him to make sure that impact didn't fade. After a while, Lily started watching the other children playing on the swings and slides. David could tell she wanted to join them, but something held her back. "You can go play if you want," he said, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know how." David frowned. "What do you mean?" "I never really got to play like that," she admitted. "My mom didn't like me going outside too much. She said it was safer if I stayed home." David felt a deep sadness settle in his chest. Childhood was supposed to be filled with laughter, with scraped knees from running too fast, with the simple joy of swinging high enough to feel like you were flying. But Lily had been denied all of that. He wanted to fix it, to give her back the childhood she had lost, but he knew it would take time. "Come on," he said suddenly, standing up. "I'll show you how." Lily looked at him skeptically. "You know how to play?" David laughed. "I wasn't always an old man in a suit, you know." That made her smile, a small one but a smile nonetheless. He walked her over to the swings and helped her onto one. "Just hold on tight," he instructed. "And when you feel ready, use your legs to push yourself forward." At first, she was hesitant, her movements uncertain. But after a few tries she started getting the hang of it. The wind rushed through her hair as she swung higher, and for the first time since he had met her, she laughed. It was a sound so pure, so full of life that it caught David off guard. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear it. They stayed at the park for a long time, until the sun started dipping below the horizon. As they walked back home, Lily seemed lighter, more at ease. David realized then that he was starting to care for her in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't just some obligation he had taken on because of Emily, she was becoming a part of his life. And strangely, he didn't mind it. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. David found himself navigating a world he never thought he would be part of. His once structured life, defined by high-rise offices and late-night meetings, had shifted into something entirely different. Now, his mornings started with making breakfast for Lily, ensuring she had something warm to eat, and his afternoons were filled with trips to the library or casual walks through Brooklyn. He had never been responsible for anyone in this way before, and while it was overwhelming at times, there was something deeply satisfying about it. Watching Lily slowly come out of her shell, witnessing her small moments of happiness, it made him feel like he was doing something right for the first time in a long time. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Lily curled up on the couch with a book while David worked on his laptop. The silence between them was comfortable, a stark contrast to the first few days when tension hung in the air. Every now and then she would glance up at him as if checking to make sure he was still there, still real. It broke his heart to realize how much she had been abandoned in her life. After a while, she set the book down and hesitated before speaking. "David?" He looked up from his screen. "Yeah." She hesitated, fiddling with the hem of her sweater. "Do you ever miss her?" David exhaled slowly, knowing exactly who she meant. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment before answering. "Every day." Lily nodded as if she understood that kind of pain. "I miss her too," she admitted. "She made me feel safe." David swallowed hard. Emily had always had that effect on people. She had a way of making everyone feel like they belonged, like they mattered. And now it was up to him to carry that forward. "You're safe here," he told her softly. "I promise." She didn't say anything, but after a moment she reached for her book again, her small fingers turning the pages with a quiet kind of trust that made David realize just how much she had begun to let him in. The next day he decided to take her shopping for some new clothes. Most of what she had was either too small or worn out, and he wanted her to have things that belonged to her, things she could take pride in. As they walked through Macy's and Herald Square, Lily's eyes darted around the store, overwhelmed by the sheer size of it. "You can pick whatever you like," David said, giving her space to explore. She hesitated at first, as if unsure if she was really allowed to choose. But after a while she started moving through the aisles, running her fingers over soft sweaters and colorful scarves. David watched her closely, noticing how she gravitated toward warm colors, yellows, oranges, soft pastels. Emily had loved those colors too. When they reached the shoe section, Lily picked up a pair of white sneakers and held them up. "These are nice," she said almost shyly. David smiled. "Then those are the ones you'll get." She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of reluctance. When she found none, she hugged the shoes to her chest and nodded. Later that night, as they ate dinner together, David realized how much had changed in such a short time. A month ago, he had been alone in his grief, drowning in work to avoid facing his emotions. And now, he had Lily, a little girl who had somehow become a part of his life in the most unexpected way. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. David hadn't realized how much he had changed until he found himself sitting in a parent-teacher conference, listening to a woman named Mrs. Callahan talk about Lily's progress in school. A few weeks ago he wouldn't have even imagined being here, let alone caring about report cards, class participation, or friendships. But now, as he sat in the small, brightly lit classroom at PS 87 William Sherman School in New York City, he listened intently, genuinely invested in what the teacher had to say. Mrs. Callahan smiled kindly at him as she flipped through some papers. "Lily is a bright girl," she said. She's very observant and has a sharp memory, but she's still hesitant in social situations. She doesn't speak up much in class, though she's clearly paying attention. David nodded, glancing at Lily, who sat beside him with her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't looking at him or the teacher. Her gaze was fixed on the floor, her shoulders slightly hunched. He had learned by now that this was her way of protecting herself. "I think she just needs time," he said. Mrs. Callahan nodded. "That's what I believe too. She's already showing signs of coming out of her shell." Last week, she raised her hand to answer a question. It was the first time she had done that. David felt a strange sense of pride swell in his chest. He looked at Lily, but she still wouldn't meet his eyes. "That's great," he said. "I'm really glad to hear that." As they left the school, David could sense that Lily was lost in her thoughts. He didn't want to push her, but he also didn't want her to feel like she had to keep everything inside. They walked in silence for a while before he finally spoke. "You know, I'm really proud of you," he said. "Raising your hand in class, that's a big deal." Lily shrugged. "It's just answering a question." "It's more than that," David said gently. "It means you're starting to feel comfortable. And that's important." She kicked a small pebble on the sidewalk. "I don't know," she muttered. "I still feel weird. Like I don't belong." David's heart ached at her words. He knew that feeling well. After Emily's death, he had spent months feeling like he didn't belong anywhere, like the world had moved on without him. But Lily was just a child, she shouldn't have to feel that way. "You do belong," he said firmly. "And not just at school. With me. In our home." Lily finally looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. "Really?" David nodded without hesitation. "Really?" That night, after Lily had gone to bed, David sat in the living room, staring at the framed photograph of Emily that sat on the mantel. He wished she were here to see all of this, to see Lily slowly opening up, to see him trying his best to be the kind of person she would be proud of. The next weekend, David decided to take Lily somewhere special. He had read about a children's bookstore in Manhattan, a cozy little place called Books of Wonder. He thought it might be a nice outing, something that would make her feel excited. As they stepped inside, Lily's eyes widened at the shelves filled with colorful books, the soft hum of quiet conversations, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee from the small cafe in the corner. She walked hesitantly through the aisles, running her fingers over the spines of the books, stopping now and then to read the titles. David watched as she picked up a book with a bright blue cover and flipped through the pages. "Do you like that one?" he asked. Lily nodded. "It looks nice." "Then it's yours," he said. She hesitated. "I can really have it?" David smiled. "Of course. You can pick out a few more too." For the first time, he saw genuine excitement in her eyes. She ended up choosing 3 books, clutching them tightly as they walked to the counter. As they left the store, she looked up at him with a small smile. "Thanks," she said. It was a simple word, but it meant everything. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. David never thought he would become the kind of person who looked forward to small, everyday routines, but life with Lily had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. Mornings were no longer rushed affairs where he grabbed coffee on the way out the door. Now they were filled with the sound of Lily shuffling into the kitchen, still half asleep as he made breakfast. Evenings weren't spent alone in his office with a drink in his hand, drowning in spreadsheets and emails. Instead, they were spent helping Lily with her homework, watching her curl up on the couch with a book, or simply sitting in companionable silence as they ate dinner. He had never imagined himself in this kind of life, but somehow it felt right. One afternoon, as they walked back from the grocery store near Central Park West, Lily suddenly tugged on his sleeve. "Can we go in the park for a little while?" she asked hesitantly. David checked his watch. He had a few emails to respond to, but nothing urgent. "Sure," he said, and they crossed the street into the park. The air was crisp and the trees had started shedding their leaves, covering the ground in shades of orange and brown. Lily walked ahead, her small feet crunching on the leaves as she looked around. David followed her, watching as she slowly made her way toward a group of kids playing by the swings. She stopped a few feet away watching them, her hands stuffed into her coat pockets. David could see the hesitation on her face. She wanted to go, but she wasn't sure if she belonged. "You can join them," he said gently. Lily glanced at him, uncertainty in her eyes. "What if they don't want me to?" David crouched down beside her. "You'll never know if you don't try." She bit her lip, then slowly walked forward. David watched as she stood near the swings, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack. One of the girls, a blonde-haired kid in a red jacket, noticed her and said something. A moment later Lily gave a small nod, and the girl gestured for her to join them. David exhaled, relief washing over him. He sat down on a bench nearby, keeping an eye on her but letting her have her space. It was a small step, but it was progress. As he sat there, he thought about how different things were now. A few months ago his world had been empty. Now it was filled with moments like these, small but significant. When Lily finally came back, she was smiling. "They were nice," she said. David smiled back. "I'm glad." That night, as they sat at the dinner table, Lily poked at her food before glancing up at him. "David?" "Yeah." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you think Emily would have liked me?" The question caught him off guard. He set his fork down and looked at her. "Of course she would have," he said without hesitation. "She had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. She would have loved you." Lily nodded slowly, then looked down at her plate. "I wish I had met her." David felt a lump form in his throat. "Me too," he said softly. Later that night, as he cleaned up the kitchen, he thought about how much Lily had become a part of his life. He wasn't just taking care of her, he was growing with her. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. David never thought he would feel this kind of warmth in his life again. The days had started to feel more meaningful, more structured, and though grief still lingered in the corners of his heart, it no longer consumed him the way it once did. Lily had become the anchor that kept him grounded, and every day he found himself growing more attached to the idea of being someone she could rely on. One Friday evening after finishing dinner, Lily sat at the kitchen table, scribbling something in a notebook. David watched her from across the room as he dried the dishes, intrigued by how focused she looked. He had never been the kind of man who paid attention to the little things before, but with Lily, he noticed everything. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way her lips moved slightly as she read silently, the way she carefully pressed her pencil to the page as if afraid to make a mistake. "What are you working on?" he finally asked, leaning against the counter. Lily hesitated, tapping her pencil against the notebook. "Just something for school." David raised an eyebrow. "Can I see?" She hesitated again, then slowly slid the notebook across the table. David picked it up and scanned the page. It was an assignment titled "Who is your hero?" His breath caught in his throat as he read the first few lines. "My hero is David Evans. He is not my real father, but he takes care of me like one. When I was sad and alone, he found me and made me feel safe. He buys me books and makes me breakfast and listens to me when I talk. He is teaching me that family doesn't have to be about blood, it can be about love too." David felt his chest tighten. He swallowed hard, setting the notebook down carefully as he looked at Lily, who was nervously watching him. "Lily," he started, but his voice came out rough, so he cleared his throat and tried again. That's really beautiful." Her cheeks turned a little pink. "It's true," she said quietly. David exhaled slowly. "You know, I was just thinking the same thing. That family isn't just about blood." He paused, his mind racing with thoughts he hadn't spoken out loud before. Would you want to make this official?" Lily's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean adoption," David said, his voice steady. "I want you to stay with me. Not just for now but forever." Lily blinked at him, her mouth slightly open. For a moment she said nothing, and David felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe she wasn't ready. But then, without warning, she pushed her chair back and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "Yes," she whispered against his shirt. "I want that." David closed his eyes, wrapping his arms around her tightly. He had been searching for purpose for so long, and now he had found it. That weekend, David started making calls. He wasn't entirely sure what the adoption process entailed, but he knew one thing: he was going to fight for Lily no matter how long it took. He spoke with a lawyer who explained the steps he needed to take. Since Lily had no living relatives who could claim custody, the process would be smoother than most cases. But there were still legalities, paperwork, and home studies to go through. Lily listened quietly as David explained everything to her later that night. "It might take a little while," he told her. "But I promise we'll get there." She nodded. "I don't mind waiting." In the following weeks, David's life became a whirlwind of meetings, background checks, and home visits from social workers. He answered every question honestly, did everything they asked of him, and made sure Lily felt secure through it all. One afternoon, as they sat together on the couch, Lily turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Emily would be okay with this?" David looked at her, surprised. "Of course," he said. "Emily would have loved you." And she would have wanted me to do what feels right. This, he gestured between them, feels right. Lily smiled a little, seeming comforted by that. For the first time in a long time, David felt like he was moving forward. Not away from Emily but towards something new, something just as meaningful. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. David had always thought that life followed a predictable path. He had built his wealth through hard work, fallen in love with Emily, and expected to grow old by her side. But life had taken a turn he never could have foreseen, leaving him in the depths of grief until Lily came along and unknowingly pulled him back into the light. Now, with the adoption process underway, he found himself experiencing something he hadn't felt in years: hope. It wasn't an easy journey, but he was determined to see it through. The weeks that followed were filled with appointments, paperwork, and background checks. David met with social workers who asked him about his past, his intentions, and his ability to provide for a child. He answered every question honestly, making it clear that this wasn't just a fleeting sense of responsibility. He truly wanted to be Lily's father. The social workers visited their home, observing their interactions, ensuring that Lily was happy and safe. David was nervous at first, but he quickly realized that Lily's presence alone was enough to reassure anyone that she belonged with him. She would talk about how he made her breakfast every morning, how they read together before bed, and how she felt safe for the first time in a long time. One evening, after another long day of meetings, David sat with Lily in the living room, watching as she doodled in her notebook. "How are you feeling about all of this?" he asked. "I know it's been a lot." Lily looked up, twirling her pencil between her fingers. "It's okay," she said. "I just don't want them to change their minds." David's heart ached at her words. "No one is going to take you away from me," he said firmly. "I promise you that." She studied him for a moment before nodding, seeming reassured. "Okay." As the days passed, David found himself thinking more and more about what their future would look like. He wanted Lily to have everything she had missed out on: a stable home, a good education, and most importantly, the love and support of a real family. He started making plans, researching schools, looking into extracurricular activities, and even considering moving to a quieter neighborhood where she could have a backyard to play in. For the first time in a long time, he was excited about the future. One afternoon, as they walked through Bryant Park, Lily suddenly stopped and tugged on David's sleeve. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said. She hesitated, kicking at a loose pebble on the ground. "If the adoption goes through, will I have your last name?" David's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't thought about that detail yet, but hearing her ask it filled him with a warmth he couldn't explain. "If you want to," he said carefully. Lily nodded slowly. "I think I'd like that." David crouched down to her level. "Then that's what we'll do." A small smile played on her lips before she threw her arms around his neck. David hugged her tightly, feeling more certain than ever that this was exactly where he was meant to be. The next morning, David received a call from his lawyer. "We have a court date," the lawyer said. "It's happening sooner than we expected." David's heart pounded. "How soon?" 2 weeks. Everything suddenly felt very real. The past few months had been filled with anticipation, but now, the moment was almost here. He immediately told Lily, who looked both nervous and excited. "So, after that, I'll really be your daughter?" she asked. David smiled. "You already are. This just makes it official." As the court date approached, David found himself feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. He knew that legally, nothing was guaranteed until the judge made the final decision, and though he had done everything right, a part of him couldn't shake the fear that something might go wrong. He barely slept the night before, his mind racing with every possible scenario. The morning of the hearing, he dressed carefully, making sure Lily looked her best as well. They arrived at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, where his lawyer met them outside. "Just be honest and speak from the heart," the lawyer advised. David took a deep breath and nodded. Inside the courtroom, they sat before the judge, a stern-looking woman who carefully reviewed their case. She asked David about his ability to provide for Lily, about his past, about why he wanted to adopt her. David spoke with conviction, explaining how Lily had changed his life, how she had given him purpose again, and how he couldn't imagine a future without her. Then the judge turned to Lily. "And how do you feel about this, young lady?" Lily sat up straight, her small hands folded in her lap. "I want David to be my dad," she said clearly. "He takes care of me and he loves me. And I love him too." David felt his throat tighten. The judge studied them for a long moment before finally speaking. "Mr. Evans, I see no reason to deny this adoption." David barely heard the rest of her words as relief flooded him. Lily was his. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The day the adoption became official felt surreal for David. As they stepped out of the courthouse, the crisp New York air filling his lungs, he glanced down at Lily, who was clutching his hand tightly. She looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes, and he saw something in them he hadn't seen before: certainty. She finally knew she belonged, that she had a home, that she was loved. David had spent years chasing wealth, building an empire, believing that success was measured by numbers in a bank account, but at that moment, standing on the courthouse steps with his daughter, he realized that love was the only real success in life. That evening he planned a quiet celebration at home. Lily's favorite meal, mac and cheese with chicken tenders, was on the table, and he had even ordered a small cake with "Welcome Home Lily" written in frosting. As they ate, Lily kept glancing at him as if trying to make sure this wasn't a dream. "So what do we do now?" she finally asked. David smiled. "Anything we want. This is our life now." She thought for a moment. "Can we take a trip? Just you and me?" David hadn't traveled for fun in years, but the idea of making memories with Lily excited him. "Where do you want to go?" Lily's eyes brightened. "Disneyland." David chuckled. "Disneyland, huh? That sounds like a perfect first trip as a family." And so, a week later, they boarded a plane to California. It was Lily's first time flying, and though she was nervous at first, her excitement soon took over. The moment they stepped into Disneyland, she was in awe, running from one attraction to another, her laughter echoing through the park. David, who had once been a man buried in business meetings and financial reports, found himself fully present, living in the moment. He rode roller coasters, ate too much cotton candy, and even wore matching Mickey Mouse ears with Lily. He hadn't felt this alive in years. One night, as they stood watching the fireworks light up the sky over Sleeping Beauty's castle, Lily grabbed his hand. "Mom would have liked this," she said softly. David felt a lump in his throat. "Yes, she would have," he agreed. "And she would have loved you." Lily leaned her head against his arm. "I think she brought us together." David had never been a man of strong faith, but in that moment he believed it too. After they returned to New York, life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Lily started school, and David adjusted his work schedule to be more present in her life. He attended parent-teacher meetings, helped her with homework, and even learned how to braid her hair, though it took him several YouTube tutorials to get it right. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was enough for Lily. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Lily suddenly looked up at him. "Do you ever get sad about Mom?" David nodded. "I do. I always will. But having you here makes the sadness easier." She smiled. "I think she'd be happy we found each other." David wrapped an arm around her. "I think so too." As time passed, their bond only grew stronger. The once lonely millionaire had become a father, not just in name but in every sense of the word. He had found happiness in the most unexpected way, not in wealth but in love. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.